you ever considered the ramifications of being fully human and fully divine? I think it would be super fun to have divine superpowers. What would your superpower be? Would it be helpful to be able to read your spouse's mind? Imagine how fun it would be to walk the streets of New York City if you could hear and understand any language. What would it be like to be able to fly over the traffic at the tunnel, or to be invisible? Certainly having some divine superpowers would be interesting and fun. But what about being fully human? In our reading today, we kind of get to be invisible, in a sense, as we're told about an exchange that Jesus has during his travels around the surrounding countryside. And in this exchange, for an instant, we get to see Jesus' fully human side. And yes, friends, in his fully human form, Jesus could be a jerk. And not just in this one instance. Consider this story from the Gospel of Thomas. Now, you know who Thomas is, but you might not know that Thomas is one of Jesus' childhood friends, one of his longest serving disciples. And Thomas wrote a gospel about his friend Jesus, which was not included in our Bible, more than likely because it contains a lot of stories about Jesus' childhood. So you can guess why those stories might not have made it into the Bible. So in this story that Thomas shares with us, Jesus was about 5 and was playing near some water. And he diverts the water from some pools into a larger stream so that he can scoop the clay out of the pools. And so he's playing in this clay that's left behind. Now it happened to be the Sabbath that day, and someone sees Jesus sculpt 12 small bird figurines out of this clay and goes and reports to Jesus' father Joseph that Jesus has broken the Sabbath law. And so Joseph confronts him, and Jesus says, "Okay, fine, whatever." Claps his hands, the birds come to life, and they all fly away. Now there was another boy there, the son of Annas, one of the high priests of the temple, and he was standing nearby. So while this exchange is going on, he's playing in the same water, and he puts the water back the way it was, flowing into the pools, so he can play in these little pools. And Jesus turns to him and says, "What harm has that water done to you?" And he curses the boy on the spot, and we are told that this little boy instantly withers. Well, needless to say, the boy's parents are not really happy. And so they take their withered little one, and they go straight to Joseph and essentially say, "Look what your kid did to my kid. Your kid is a bully." So now, Jesus, you can kind of picture this in your mind. He's just gotten in big trouble at home. He's out wandering around. He probably has a stick in his hand. He's probably whacking things. He's probably kicking rocks. He's not in a great mood. And another little boy accidentally bumps into him. And right there, he drops the kid, dead, on the spot. Well, if the parents of the little withered one were unhappy, you can imagine that the parents of the dead boy are pretty upset. And they go straight to Joseph and they tell him, "Your child is a monster. You can't live in this town anymore." So now Joseph is faced with having to pack up his family and move because Jesus is acting inappropriately. So the family is acquainted with this fellow by the name of Zacchaeus, who's a great teacher, and everybody knows Zacchaeus. And so Zacchaeus says, "Oh, it's fine. It's not really a problem. We just need to teach Jesus how to read. It'll all be good. He'll get all straightened out. Everything will be fine. You just need to send him to school." And Joseph says, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's send him to school. So they send Jesus to Zacchaeus for schooling, whereby Jesus promptly abused, embarrassed, and humiliated Zacchaeus in front of all of his temple colleagues. So yes, friends, it appears that at times Jesus could be a jerk. Now in today's gospel, a woman begs for healing, not for herself, but for her daughter. And it's important to note that this woman is a Canaanite, in the same general category of unclean as Samaritans. She is unwashed in Jewish tradition and therefore an untouchable. And Jews referred to these folks with a racial slur. They called them dogs. Now, in my house, dogs are treated like royalty, so this racial slur makes no sense to me whatsoever. But it's also important to know that as a woman, especially as a foreign woman, she would not have been allowed to talk to a man outside of her own household. She did it anyway. A woman would never consider arguing theology with a man. She did it. And it appears that she actually wins the theological argument. At first, Jesus ignores her altogether, and even though she uses a little-known title that only a select few would possibly even know, one that even the disciples and the faith leaders have not yet used for Jesus in calling him Son of David, this tells us that she knew and fully understood what she was doing and who she was doing it with. She understood Jesus' nature and his connection to God. Now, the disciples are freaked out, and they tell him to send her away. He speaks to her, but he reminds her first that she doesn't even deserve his attention. I was sent to the lost sheep of Israel, as in, not to you. But she begs again, and this time he's just outright rude. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs, he says, and he just keeps on walking. Now, this is not the Jesus of my childhood. This is not the Jesus that we've been taught about. He has just completely contradicted himself, because in the first portion of the gospel I read to you a moment ago, he's tried to settle a discussion among his disciples. He has said it's not what goes in your mouth, referring to the very strict dietary laws of Judaism, that defiles you, but what comes out of your mouth. And now he's just used a racial slur in calling her a dog and dismissed her as not deserving of his time or attention. All in that one single sentence. What a jerk. I wonder if you can recall a time when we as a nation, or as a city, or as a church, might have acted similarly. Have we ever treated someone from outside our community with this kind of disdain? Have we ever thought we need to take care of our own before we worry about those others? Before I lost my brother Jeff to AIDS in 1994 and started working in AIDS ministry, I might have treated those with visible signs of infection as untouchables. I might have said, "You did this to yourself, I can't help you." Or, "I don't have time for this. I have all these other people over here that I need to help." Before I ever visited Africa for the first time, I might have thought of all the African nations as just like one big country, and that they were just constantly involved in senseless tribal warfare. Before I ever taught in a Title I school, I might have thought that poor families were poor because they were lazy, or shiftless, or even criminals. What I learned in those early days of ministry, travel, and teaching is that whenever we limit who we will be to other people, God gets busy. Busy erasing the lines that we draw, tearing down the walls that we erect around ourselves, and calling us to limitless compassion empathy, and love of those around us. Now, this Canaanite woman, she surely pushed his buttons, but also his boundaries. So while, yes, in his mind, his mission is perfectly clear to find the lost sheep of Israel, in this moment, Jesus realizes, acknowledges, and accepts that perhaps God is speaking to him through this woman. She doesn't back down. She doesn't accept the implications of her social status. She doesn't go away sad and brokenhearted either. She stands her ground, speaks her need, and she actually wins Jesus' attention and healing. Through her faith, Jesus comes to understand that God's purpose for him is greater than even he imagined, and the purpose of his life and his ministry. No longer can he define and control his ministry. There's no more safety and certainty for him. So if Jesus, being fully human and fully divine, can evolve to a new understanding of his role, his ministry, and the purpose of his life, then I guess we can as well, or we can at least try. Over and over through these kinds of encounters we read in Scripture, both those that are in our Bible and those that are left out of our Bible, God's call to us means tearing down our carefully constructed walls of us and them, welcoming strangers, and putting to rest, hopefully, once and for all, the notion that there is not enough to go around. No one who comes to Jesus in any of the gospel stories with this kind of faith is ever disappointed or turned away. So maybe Jesus wasn't being rude so much as making a point for everyone to see. But does it really matter? Can we allow Jesus to be fully human and have a bad day? Can he be rude and be a jerk and still make a really important point? Consider this. We might feel as if we're the ones dropping crumbs from our table, and that this crumb dropping represents our ministry in the world, and that we should strive to drop as many crumbs as possible. But let me remind you, friends, we are not Jews. We are not the master at the table, and we are not the lost sheep of Israel. So by the boundaries of this story, we are that Canaanite woman, looked down on, called by racial slurs like dogs, begging for Jesus' divine superpower to heal us. Perhaps our own faith will be as strong as the Canaanite woman who stands before Jesus and begs for healing, and as strong as Jesus, who in that moment steps into a new understanding of his own call. One thing we can be sure of is that if we ask in faith, we will not be sent away empty. Thanks for listening.